Well, thank you, Jeremy and Ken. Nice to join you. Thanks for the invitation.
Ma'am, so tell us a little bit about your childhood in the sense of how the associated responsibilities of growing up on a ranch factored into your career choice, i.e. like driving tractors, vehicles at a young age and so forth.
Right. I think, especially on a farm, work requires a workforce. And so if you can do it, you did it. And I had parents that just really incorporated everyone into the work that was at hand. And I think it was such a, they never presented it like chores. It was something that we not only had the responsibility for, but even at a young age, we had a lot of authority that went along with the responsibility, which then made us invested in it. So we got to learn the thrill of problem solving and the joy of hard work early.
Awesome. I'll tell you that, Tammie Jo, did you fly before getting in the Navy, or was your first aviation flight a Navy Fam 1?
Well, I hired an instructor and an airplane instead of using an airline ticket to get to a job interview. I talked the company into letting me cash in my ticket and do it that way so I could kind of get an intro into aviation. But as far as having any books, learning a pre-flight, anything like that, the Navy was my introduction to aviation.
Because of your gender, was there any excess pressure that you felt over and above what the typical Navy pilot has to deal with already in the challenges of becoming carrier qualified or during school?
Well, I think if you're the only green apple in a bushel of red, then yes, you do get noticed more. And I was the only female in my first 4 squadrons. So my welcome rested in the hands of the commanding officer. And if I had a good commanding officer, then we all just focused on the mission at hand, which was flying, and that was challenging enough. But if there was a bad skipper, then, you know, I had to navigate some fiefdoms and silos, and mission creep was inevitable. And so flying became kind of the secondary mission at that point. And I learned that you'll learn from good leaders as well as bad leaders. And you just can't let an offense get in the way of an opportunity. So I learned some good lessons on the ground as well as in the air in the Navy.
That's great. That's a great outlook or attitude to have. I wanted to, so there was some resistance from some old school of thought in your way, and you were one of the pioneers and in this regime. Was there a mantra or practice that you had as to how to overcome that resistance from people like that?
You know, I would have to kind of go back to having launched into naval aviation, into that from a really firm foundation of a family that cherished me and a faith that assured me there are no second-class citizens, having come to know Christ in high school. So whenever I went into that, it took me years to find a way into naval aviation. And I just felt like, you know what, the Lord has helped me fight this battle. And so I'm just going to rest on my perception of myself being through the eyes of Christ rather than the eyes of my peers or my commanding officers, because those differ. Everyone has different opinions. And so I really kind of had to, almost on a daily basis, had to remind myself, what's my motive for being here? And is it the right motive? And then what's my merit for being here? And if I could answer those two positively, then I just kind of put it at the Lord's feet, the battles at the Lord's feet, and studied harder and tried harder.
And Tammie, that's really awesome. And I'm kind of going to lead into this next question. It's a little bit off script, but you mentioned being a Christian and having a strong, deep faith. I know that I am as well, and it's gotten me through some pretty challenging times, especially with being in the military. But can you elaborate? Your husband's an aviator as well. Can you elaborate a little bit on a similar situation like I have? I have a wife who works for Southwest Airlines as well, and we have small children. Can you elaborate a little bit about some of the challenges that you and your husband were faced with as your children were coming up?
Sure. We, of course, I grew up with both parents worked at home. And so whenever we had both stepped out of the Navy and started flying at Southwest Airlines, we had wanted children for years. And by the time we had our firstborn, I was probably number 1 or 2 first officer in Houston. And so we realized, I can honestly kind of pick and choose my own schedule. Southwest is the only company, I think it would have worked for us anyway, in having such a fluid scheduling system. So I was able, as a new mom, to kind of clear my schedule, give it away to other people. And then if everybody was healthy, I would pick up a 2-day trip. And then when Marshall, our second, came along, we just continued that. And our assistant pastor and his wife said, well, we'll step in and be a part-time nanny and see if this works for you. And so every 6 months, Dean and I had what we called a family meeting, and just to see, is this really working? And I felt like as long as we had family friends that were in that spot and they were under godly influence while we were gone, and Dean and I staggered our trips. So usually I kept a journal throughout their childhood, and whenever we were both going to be gone at night, I would write them a little devotional or some kind of a little puzzle to do or an I Spy, something. And then that gave me a chance to look back at it and see how many days a year are we really gone. And I think we averaged about 52 nights a year that both of us were gone. And it was just, we made it work. I think it's something that, the things that you make a priority, they get done. And again, with a fluid scheduling program that Southwest Airlines is the only one that has it, that made it work for us.
Excellent. Excellent.
Jeremy, I'm sorry, I would like to tag on to that, because that's one of the biggest questions I hear from young ladies headed into the military or into the aviation community. That's the number one question, is how do I do this and have a full life invested in my community, have a family? How do I do that? And, it's not a question that guys ask themselves. They look at what they want to do in life, what they're suited for, and they go after it. And girls, young ladies have to do that, but they also have to look at the balance of how do I do that with the family? And one of the key ingredients, I think, 2 things, is who you marry and if they're willing to work at making it work. Dean, my husband, he learned to braid hair and do all the things that moms usually do. I mean, he's an expert at things, cooks better than I do. And also living below your income. That's so important if you want to have some choices as a family and how much you work, is living below what you bring in. And so those are the 2 things that I look back now and I see that really helped Dean and I.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, that's some really good advice because we know that there's several young ladies that look at this career and think, I wonder if I have a shot. And I'm going to ask you a 3-part question. As a fellow former naval aviator, I wanted to fly carrier aviation, or TAC Air is what it's called. I ended up flying P3s, which was still good, but not. So my understanding is you flew the A7, Corsair, and the F-18.
Right.
I saw you were in a V8, was it a VAQ squadron? Was that did you fly the Prowler as well?
No, no, our two squadrons were formed during Reagan's administration. One in Key West, VAQ 33, they flew A6s and I believe P3s. And then in Point Mugu, which is Malibu, California, our squadron, VAQ 34, flew A7s, and then some of the crews flew A3s. So I flew A7s and then transitioned into F-18s.
Okay. What was your favorite one of those? What was the coolest?
You know, I really enjoyed bombing and strafing in the A7, but the F-18 is a dream machine, so that would be it.
Okay, yeah, I kind of figured. Well, I've heard a lot of guys say that. I've flown with a lot of guys that were F-18 people, and just knowing that, what was the most hair-raising situation you ever encountered while you were flying the Navy airplanes?
You know, I had a couple actually, but the most hair-raising would be in the A7. I was a new A7 student and had about 7 hours in the A7, and was doing a formation flight from El Centro, where our detachment was, to do FAM flights, and going back to Lemoore. There was a big storm over Lemoore, but my instructor decided, well, we're going to go and just orbit overhead until it opens up. So we were in holding for, I don't know, an hour or so. And as the fuel was getting down to Bingo to China Lake, the weather lifted above minimums. And during that holding time, my A7 had lost its instruments. So as a student, you're usually in the lead. And so I gave the message that you're in the lead, and told them my instruments, I don't have instruments. And in the A7, your HUD, your heads up display, is a repeat of your instruments. So when you lose your instruments, you lose your HUD as well. So we had 100-mile-an-hour crosswinds up there, and staying in holding was a challenge. So I gave it to him, and as we came down, he just, as soon as we checked into approach, he jinked away and left me to find and fly my own approach, which is just not the way tactical aviation works. You do stick with your wingman, no matter what Top Gun says, and especially when they have an emergency, when they don't have a panel. Then we should have done what they call a PAPI approach, come in on the ball, drop me off at a runway, and then him come back around. But he jinked away, left me, and I got stop, turn, start, turn, increased descent, decreased descent, vectors from an ATC person I owe my life, until I broke out there in Lemoore.
Wow, that's pretty scary. That sounds like a nightmare.
I don't even like thinking about it now.
That's awesome. That's an awesome story. And what I'd like to do is lead into the big to-do, which was Southwest 1318. Why don't you talk a little bit about that day, a little bit of things that we may not have read about, and anything you'd care to share about that day?
I think I'll start with just how our day started, because foundations are important. And I think it's probably around 9/11 that I just realized, we do still need to have a tactical approach to our job as commercial airline pilots. And in doing that, you really need a cohesive team to do that. And so I just always make sure whenever I get up early enough for myself. I get up early enough to have my quiet time, have a cup of tea, get my oatmeal, so that when I get to the hotel lobby, I'm done with me. It's all about my crew, the weather, the aircraft, the day ahead. And so I would say that is really helpful, so that you can find out if there's anything going on with your crew members before you ever even get in the van to get to the airport. that morning, Darren and I had flown just one day together before that, and our flight attendants were coming from another hotel. So as we got to the airport, we divided duties, and I picked up a tray of coffee while he got the aircraft going. The systems started up, and then whenever I arrived, I didn't have to say, I need to do captain's briefing or anything like that, because when you bring coffee or chocolate or something for the crew, they come up to get it. And it's just kind of a natural way to get to introduce each other to who's where. And I try to make time to actually look at everybody's eyes and ask them their name. Now, it's on a piece of paper. I could just look at that. But I feel like it's hard to know somebody if you don't know their name. And it's best for them to tell you. So just spending a little time with your crew and finding out where they're from, if they commuted in, if this was day 3 for them or 1, 2, and take a few minutes to just build some bridges of communication. Because when you take the time to have a little more to say than have you checked your equipment and, do we need potable water? It seems to build this bridge of communication that people will let you know a lot earlier about things. If you've taken time to look at baby pictures or listen to a soccer score, they're not going to hesitate whenever you feel like there's something not sounding right, or there's somebody not acting quite right back here. And had great flight attendants. Darren Elliser was my first officer that day. And then Catherine Sandoval, Rachel Fernheimer, and Shanique Mallory were my flight attendants. That was the first day that we had met them. And so just having a friendly welcome and getting started kind of as a team. We had about 5 minutes, and then we're loading. And when we had a few more minutes in LaGuardia, then everybody recongregated at the galley. And I remember Darren and I both had high school seniors. So the question was, what are you giving your senior for graduation? And Darren said his daughter was getting to pick the family vacation. And I said, well, I'm copying the book of Proverbs in a journal for my son. He got flight lessons earlier. And that kind of opened the door to everybody just talking a little more about who they are and what they're doing. I'm sorry, the sun is setting, so my lighting is getting.
Oh, it's okay. That's fine. It looks fine here.
Okay.
Well, you said a few things that are very crucial to establishing cohesive crew coordination, basically making a personal connection. And that allows a crew member, no matter where they are, and you said there's no such thing as a second-class citizen, and that allows a crew member, when you make a personal connection, to not be afraid to ask questions or share information. There was one point during that day that you must have, my big, let me just say, as another Southwest captain, my big takeaway from listening to the event through not only the news but the company was what the crucial part of that success was the calm demeanor that was established, and that is set by the captain, which you yourself. So at some point during that day, you made a decision that I have to be calm to keep anybody else that I'm going to depend on from spazzing. And that's evident in your in all the ATC transmissions. I mean, there's a calm voice coming over there. And when you needed to be urgent, you were urgent. Can you just tell us, at what point did you make that decision? Was that before you even left, or was that as the chaos is happening?
I think I don't think you really make a decision at that point. I found at the end of that day that so much of what you make a habit in your everyday life, that becomes your instinct. That's your reaction. So I don't think really anything that Darren, Shanique, Catherine, Rachel did that day was decided that day. I would have to say, even before that emergency, I could tell just by the way that the flight attendants greeted passengers coming on that they weren't doing it just out of what was required. They were genuine in their compassion. And so when there was such an emergency, they were genuine in their compassion. And Darren, the same way. He was very, very good to fly with. He was very competent, very good pilot himself. And whenever we had decisions to make coming down that we had to reevaluate, and sometimes we didn't agree, but whenever we spoke, we talked out loud about it. For instance, the flaps 15, which is for single engine, versus the flaps 5, which I use. Darren was busy with systems and checklists, and so he reminded me, we do flaps 15 for a single engine, which was a great reminder. But having flown it and handling it and realizing we had so much drag out there and we're so overweight for landing, just as a guessing about how overweight we are for landing, I knew that we didn't have the thrust for flaps 15. It's why I chose flaps 5. And whenever I told him that, then he just said, what speed do you want? It was a great working relationship, but nobody there decided to do that day. That's how they had made decisions in the past. So that was what their reaction and their instinct was in an emergency.
Well, I heard that it was shaking so bad that you had trouble even looking at the instruments after that engine blew.
Right. We couldn't focus our eyes on the instruments or the checklist until we got it slowed down a little bit. There was just too much jarring. So we had a few moments of isolated adrenaline rush before we could slow it down enough. The pitch over was steep enough that when we slowed it down, we still lost, I think, 19,000 feet in the first 5 minutes or so. And that's the slowed descent. So it was coming down pretty fast.
Very, very good account. Can you tell us a little more about what was going on in the cockpit and what were the indicators that led to you having a problem? Obviously, it was pretty big, but can you just talk us a little bit about the sequences of events?
Sure. There was no sequence until there was an explosion. There's zero vibrations in the engine, even after the NTSB report comes out. It's just the fan blade severed, and that happened to strike. It severed and exited at about the 6 o'clock position on the engine, which struck that big buckle that holds the cowling. And that's why we had such a shredding of the cowling. And the initial feeling and experience we had was an explosion, and then the whole aircraft skidded sideways, pitched over in a dive, and snap rolled to the left. Darren and I caught it, both of us on the yoke, and leveled the wings carefully with rudder. And we both thought we'd been hit by another aircraft. It was just so sudden and so violent. And in that first moment, we could see our number one engine was dead. And then the shuddering began. And that was really caused by just the cowling itself peeled back something like a banana peeling and stayed attached. So, those big pieces of cowling flailing in 500-mile-an-hour wind under the wing, of course, caused shuddering. There was pieces torn out of the leading edge of the wing. There was just a lot of damage done, mostly by the small pieces. The big pieces, ATC said they could follow to the ground, but the small pieces did the worst damage. And the shuddering never was the same. The ripping and tearing of metal continued until we landed. But the window, there was a number of windows that were struck, but the one that gave way was really the one that caused the worst damage.
That must have been pretty intense for sure. And to get that sudden explosion and then pulling it back together, getting the aircraft under control, assessing, and then running. Now, how long did it take you to realize that it was a a catastrophic malfunction, as in an explosion?
I don't even know that we, right when it happened, we really just treated the symptoms because you can't see your engine from that side of it. And I could see the leading edge of the wing later on once we had it stable enough that I could look out there. But initially, like I said, Darren and I both thought we'd been struck by another aircraft and we'd lost number one engine. So we just dealt with a rapid depressurization. So, and there was smoke pulled up into the cockpit, as well as a dense cloud of condensation because of the rapid depressurization. And then not being able to focus our eyes initially, and then just having the air pulled out of your lungs and ears, rather painful. And it just kind of pulls everything down to maintain aircraft control, analyze the problem, and take appropriate action and maintain situational awareness. So that mantra of aviate, navigate, communicate was really what we dealt with. Sometimes we got cut short and we just aviated. But that was what we did. We didn't really know what exactly had happened until much later.
There's some questions from the audience here related to prayer. Here's Marie says, do you have a specific prayer or devotional you begin with your flying days with whatever is on your heart at that time? And I was just going to say that there's a book out there called, or there's a movie from the 40s about World War II, is God is my co-pilot. And there's a saying that says, if God is your co-pilot, change seats.
I was going to have to say, I don't serve a God that sits right seat.
Yeah.
So I will say it's my habit to start the day usually in the Psalms, and I try to work my way through the Psalms a couple of times during the year, and then I send a piece of that usually on a pretty picture that I've taken somewhere in my travels to my family. Whenever they all got big enough that they weren't at the breakfast table having family devotions, then I started sending them a devotion. No matter where we are, we all can kind of start our day on the same scripture.
Very good. So the title of the program is Breaking the Chain. Obviously, the chain was broken because you didn't lose the aircraft. You took the cards you were dealt with. You handled the emergency. You and your team handled the emergency, and it led to a successful outcome. So can you talk a little bit about some of the links of the chain that happened and some of the links that were broken?
I will say, once we had control of the aircraft, Darren and I both, one of the things I really appreciate about Darren is he always kept a bird's eye view. It wasn't just what's going on in the cockpit, but what's going on in our airplane with our people. So as soon as we had it kind of under control, there were a number of true stories that just flashed through my mind that I will say really helped. So investing in the time to read safety reports or just good nonfiction books was helpful. One of the things that I did early was, it was Darren's leg. Of course, we both grabbed it when we were just hit in the air with that explosion, but we could not communicate. There was such a roar going through the aircraft. We couldn't even hear ourselves communicate. But I remembered that Air France accident and thought, we really don't need two people flying the same aircraft. And so I tapped him, and when I got his attention, I took my hands off the yoke to let him know, you've got it. And then we got our oxygen masks on so that we could communicate. And we chose Philadelphia and headed that way. And then I punched into the PA system, because I just think, as startling as it was for Darren and I, it would have to be mind-numbing for the people in the back. And I made a PA, I wasn't sure if they'd hear it or not, and just said, we're not going down, we're going into Philly, and got back to flying. And the captain is required to fly emergency landings, and I wanted to get the feel of the aircraft with a little altitude below me. So I took over flying after that. but giving your crew, all the information you can, giving your passengers real-time information, it turned out to be very important. The flight attendants had buckled up. It was rough, but when they heard what the plan was, the aircraft was still under control and headed someplace, they unbuckled, got on their feet, headed through a very violently shuddering aisle and helped people. And passengers, Andrew Needham, Tim McGinty, Peggy Phillips, and there were other passengers that got up and helped during this time. And I just think, one thing inspires hope, that, information inspires hope for the flight attendants to get up, inspires passengers to get up to help. And I will say that was probably my biggest takeaway, was the fact that hope doesn't always change our circumstances, but it will always change us and our approach to the situation.
What was there a Southwest emergency that you had prior to Flight 1380 that was also hair raising since the Navy?
I really didn't. Now I had a couple of flights where either I had flight control issues. I say flight control, flap issues, that we went ahead and declared an emergency and landed less than flaps 30. So but no, nothing hair raising. Boeing makes such a stable and well-crafted aircraft that I can say 24 years at that point, and I'd never had anything hair raising in the Boeing 737.
Very good. Very good. So what would be your advice to the ladies that are out there who are inspired to want to go fly? I mean, we've already touched on it a little bit. Maybe you can elaborate a little more on that.
Sure. I would say, please get into it. The aerospace industry is so dynamic. It's exciting, and there's so many different things to do in it. Obviously, I chose flying, but there's air traffic control, there's mechanicking, there's law, there's administration, there's ops agents, there's all kinds of things to do in the industry of aerospace. So I would really encourage you to do it. And I think that in America, there's truly no reason you can't do it. There are scholarships to get your ground school free and your first flight, if not your private license. The Trump administration saw that the women in the aerospace industry, the needle hadn't moved in a couple of decades. So they formed this Women in Aviation Advisory Board. It's a part of the DOT reporting to the FAA. And I'm on that. We've been just looking at what are the barriers to women and how do we get rid of them? And there should be coming soon a place, a consolidated place where you can go to look for scholarships, men and women. Look for the scholarships and have that. But the EAA, the 99s, the Women in Aviation, there's all kinds of sources where you can kind of taste aviation, see if it's for you. For myself, I knew I couldn't afford the books, let alone the flight lessons. And I just love my country. So I was excited to get to serve my country and learn to fly all in one fell swoop. So there's the military, you will just never learn in more dynamic, incredible aircraft than in the military. So there's all kinds of choices out there. I know COVID has made our industry slow down, but the experts expect us to be at a pilot and technician shortage like we've never had it before by 2025. So if you're interested, I would say dive in.
Can you take the next question?
Sure. We've got some questions from the audience still here. Were you aware that, or any on the day, just going back to the accident, I hate to I don't want to make you relive it, but it had a good outcome, but there was a similar engine explosion in 2016. Did that, knowing that happened, was that in your mind that day at all?
As Darren and I came down and found out a little bit more from the flight attendants about what was going on back there. I think it crossed our minds. I will say it was a very busy flight. I know it was 20 to 22 more minutes until we landed, but we just had to replan our approach a number of times. As we got closer to the ground, there were more things that we thought we would be able to use that we could not. And so we didn't do a lot of analysis, I think, mentally until after we got on the ground of other things.
Very, very good. We have a flight attendant that's been with the airline for 21 years, and
Very nice.
she just started. She's working on her private pilot certificate right now. I actually know her. I won't call her name, but she wants to know, do you fly general aviation right now? And also, it was a question for Ken as well. Ken, I know you flew or you owned the Skymaster for a while, but for both of you, talk a little bit about general aviation. Do you still participate in aviation?
Tammie?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Ken.
Oh, I was going to say, you go ahead. You're still involved.
Oh, yes. We just finished refurbishing our 1987 PA-46, the Piper Malibu. And so we took it to Alaska last summer and back, and decided it is definitely time for an avionics update. And so we just finished putting in Garmin glass from one end to the other, as well as the Garmin autopilot. We picked it up in Texas and flew it to its annual inspection there in Kansas, or Olathe, Kansas, and it flies like a dream. Dean and I both are involved with Angel Flight on the South Central board here in Texas, but also Texas, Oklahoma area, but and fly missions with Angel Flight. It's such a great reason to start your engine and get airborne. I know the $100 hamburger has its purpose to keep us and keep our skills sharp, but when you can coordinate that with taking someone to a medical appointment or taking them home, it just, you'll always leave richer than you left.
For me, flying, my dad, who's also named Ken, he was a private pilot when I was a little kid, and between my dad and I, we've owned 3 different Skymasters at 3 different times, and it's been a while. I've sold it in 2008. So the general aviation flying that I do anymore is, it's been a while. Let me just put it that way. We also owned a V-tail Bonanza, which I really liked, but my dad has since moved to Florida. So I'm up here in Northwest Indiana near Chicago. So we don't really have a common airplane to do that anymore. But to answer that question, I wouldn't mind doing it. I know. But anyway, there's one other question that came up from the audience was, did you ever do a deployment with the Fleet Hornet Squadron? And what squadron, what ship?
So whenever I was going through A7s, it's when Congress was looking at lifting the combat exclusion policy. And the Air Force, Marine Corps, Army had no women pilots flying tactical aircraft. So the Navy was the only one that did, and our squadron got a lot of attention at that time. Our skipper sent 2 of us to do the A7 weapons training, and Pam Lyons, Carol, and I went down and did that. And we always kind of joked, we weren't sure if it was to prove that we could or prepare us for when we would. But both of us really enjoyed weapons. And then about a year later, we transitioned to the F-18 Hornet. Women were still not in the fleet squadrons at that time. It takes a little while from the time they start thinking about it till something happens, till it's incorporated. And my year group was the cutoff. So my year group and older were not eligible to go to Fleet Squadron. And so I enjoyed flying the Hornet as an electronic aggressor for about a year and a half. And then I stepped into flying an O2, what you had, over forest fires, and then to Southwest Airlines.
That's awesome. Good stuff. And we mentioned about the different types of programs that are out there to help get folks into aviation. One of the things to mention is the AOPA also offers scholarships. And have you done any work with AOPA at all? You mentioned EAA as well. Can you talk a little bit
Right.
about any of your programs that you're going to do with those big agencies in the future?
You know, I'm a part of Women in Aviation, and I hope to see people at Oshkosh this year. I hope we're having Oshkosh. So, but I'm not officially linked to EAA. I just know they have a great Young Eagles program. My husband is a Young Eagle pilot, and so I just know of those, the 99s. I think they're amazing. I'm not a part of them, but I really admire them. And so my linkage really is with museums. I feel like they are the storytellers of our history, and that's so important. The Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum in Honolulu, Hawaii, my husband and I are on that board, and then the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, as well as the Angel Flight South Central board.
While I got you on the line, I'm going to also, this is back to general aviation, your aircraft. So have you ever done anything outside of normal tricycle gear aircraft? Have you fly tail wheel, float plane, or anything like that, or any kind of different adventure type flying?
You know, not in general aviation yet. I've flown a Cardinal. That was the first airplane we owned. And we flew that from South Texas up to Alaska and back, going up the Alaska Highway on the east side of the Rockies, going up, and then through the Canadian Rockies, what they call the trench in Canada, coming back. And then last summer we did it in the Malibu. And my husband deserves all the credit for flight planning all of that. But I haven't done tail draggers yet. That's something that's on our bucket list. I think whenever we go get our PA 46 once a year training with Joe Casey, that's on the menu.
Outstanding. Well, I definitely recommend going and getting your float plane rating at some point in the future, just because it's so much fun. It is so enjoyable. So I definitely recommend that.
Well, just flying around with Samaritan's Purse a little bit up in Alaska, it's certainly whets your appetite. They use them like people use taxis here. It's just pretty amazing, and how functional it is in a land of lakes.
Right. Ken, you want to take the next one?
Sure. There's several questions from the audience that I'm just afraid we're not going to be able to get to, but a few people are asking, about your call sign. Did you have a call sign?
Oh, I forgot to answer that. It's not very exciting, but my maiden name was Bonnell. And when I checked into T2s, which is the first jet in the Navy to fly, my instructor's name was Clyde. And so the schedulers put us on the schedule as Bonnie and Clyde. And they cracked themselves up every day. My instructor never laughed about it, but Bonnie just stuck, and that was my call sign for the next 10 years.
Yeah, they're usually Navy. I didn't have the P3s. We didn't give them out but I know the TAC Air community is usually kind of brutal with them sometimes. That wasn't too bad.
No, I felt like I got off pretty well.
Other than, well, Jeremy, did you get another one real quick?
Absolutely. And this was a really good question. And primarily our audience is general aviation. Now we've got military, we've got airline pilots, corporate pilots. But one of the questions that came up was, what advice would you give to the GA pilots on handling any kind of engine failure in, a piston airplane?
Right. First of all, it wouldn't matter whether you're GA, military of any branch. Truly, the things that we practice in our everyday routines, our checklists, and taking time to run over those procedures, and just pretending, if my engine quit here, what would I do? if my engine quit there, what would I do? And keeping an eye on nearest field. And then the biggest thing that I think helped Darren and I was just hand flying, being very comfortable hand flying. There's no substitute for it because it gives you a feel of what the aircraft is doing, what it can do. And sometimes you won't have those systems. So hand flying, it also gives you this confidence. The engine fails, but the wings don't fall off. There's still lift, you still have a glide ratio, and just realizing that when the engine fails, obviously you need to be looking, the closer to the ground you are, the faster you need to find it. But, every airplane has a glide to it. And when you hand fly, you get a feeling for that. And so my number one recommendation would be hand fly your airplane. And that way you're confident with it. You're ready.
And go ahead and take one more question, and then I'll ask the final question and hand it over to Tammie to close it out.
Okay. I heard in an interview one time you say that, and this goes along with some of the questions that are being answered for some of the female pilots out there, that I heard you say that one of your mentors told you that in dealing with resistance, use your humor first to diffuse a situation or a potential conflict. And along those lines, and for Flight 1380 on April 17th of 2018, did you ever use your humor that day?
No, that wasn't a day of humor, but I wasn't dealing with human conflict either. My team they were all leaning into the situation. There was no resistance among the crew to do the right thing. They were right there where they should be. But I will give you an example of using humor. Captain Rosemary Mariner was the mentor that told me that. She was in the first class of women to ever fly in the military. The Navy was the first to allow women to earn their wings of gold. And so when they earned their wings, they kind of sent them all directions, one to fly helos, one to fly props, one to fly jets. And so she was alone in the jet pipeline for a while. And she took her notes, she said, from how the colored men incorporated into the squadron, because she didn't have women to see, okay, how do women navigate, this path? And so she noticed that they used humor, and she said, if you can diffuse the situation, do it with humor. And that way, as you're breaking trail through the jungle, you're not using a machete that's just chopping down people. You need to be able to work with people as well as stand your ground. And whenever I got to Southwest, my first few months, there was a captain that I met at the jetway. He was up there first, and I got up there. He was an older gentleman, and he looked me up and down, and he shook his head, rolled his eyes, and said, "Another empty kitchen." And I looked him up and down and rolled my eyes and said, "Another empty golf cart." And we both laughed and we had a great time. But you do sometimes need to just let them know, what, that's not going to throw me off. It's going to take a stronger wind than that to blow me off course. But if you can get somebody to laughing, a lot of times they let go of that prejudice that they thought that they had. So you've helped the person behind you when you can do it that way.
Excellent.
Well, Tammie Jo, I want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight and taking the time out of your busy schedule to partake in this program and helping me make this program successful. I'd like to do two things. One, I'd like for you to answer this question and then your final comments before we close out tonight. And that question is what is Captain Shults' definition of a professional pilot?
I think the definition of a professional pilot would be someone who knows their stuff and knows their people, because aviation is never a one-man or one-woman team. It is always a crew, whether you're flying single seat in air shows or you're flying a commercial airliner. It's a team effort. And so knowing your craft, knowing your aircraft and how to fly it is, of course, important. But knowing your crew and making sure that it's a cohesive crew, because you have helped it to be so, is just as important.
Excellent. And any final thoughts before we close out tonight?
You know, I would just close with a quote from Amelia Earhart, one of my favorite, which is, "Adventure is worthwhile." And I would just point out, she didn't say that because she was always on some great adventure. She was benched as much as she was airborne. She had medical problems, she had mechanical problems, and she was trying to fly through the Great Depression. There were financial problems. But I think she realized that adversity has a natural ballast in adventure. And when we feel like we're knocked off our feet or benched in life, which right now there's so much going on in our world, economically, medically, politically, it would be easy to feel like you're benched. But I would encourage you and say adventure has a great way, a winsome way of pulling us off that bench and back on our feet. So take time to make sure that if your adventure isn't in your work, find some.
Excellent. Excellent advice tonight. Again, I can't thank you enough. From Ken, myself, and the viewers, I am grateful that you showed up and dedicated your time tonight and just to talk to us, just like a couple of pilots. All in the effort to make things better in our wonderful aviation community.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. And thank you, Ken. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks for paving the way for so many others, and thanks for your service.
Thank you too.
Absolutely. Thank you for your service, Tammie. All right.
Bye.
Okay. So if you haven't checked it out, check out Tammie Jo's book, Nerves of Steel. Closing comments. Thank you all tonight. If you got any questions at all, send me an email at flyallamerican@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. And join us on March the 30th at 7:30 p.m. as I welcome my friend Reed Thomas, who is an F-15, former F-15 Eagle pilot, and he's going to talk about aeronautical decision-making and some stories as well. You will face many defeats in your life, but never let yourself be defeated. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. And again, thank you, Tammie, for your wonderful visit tonight. It was greatly appreciated. Good night.
Good night.